Well, I will be the first to say it's been a very long time since we've been able to do one of these, and it is extremely exciting to get back to doing this again, especially with one of my greatest friends, Tim. I'm so happy to have you tonight, man. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you have you here. It's been a heck of a few months. Everybody's been very busy with, we call it IRL in the streaming world because I guess there's two different places. There's the streaming world and then there's our real life, which is the IRL part, as they say.
Right.
So yeah, IRL's been, as you know, busy for the both of us. So we do apologize for not having the regular content that we've had on here. And again, just a huge thank you to Darren Rawlings for what he has been doing for the page and keeping us up to date with this day in history every single day. I mean, this dude has not missed a beat. So huge, huge thank you for everything you're doing in that department, Darren. And we couldn't do this if it wasn't for you. So, we really do appreciate everything that you've done for this page. As well as John, I know you're busy too with the teaching world. Trust me, I see it. I understand. So, I hope everything's well with you, and we look forward to when you can start returning your content. You still have a place here no matter what. You're part of Unfiltered Family for Life, and that's a cool ticket you get when you join the Unfiltered crew. With that being said, we have a nice little title down there underneath that you guys can probably see that says the Battle of Bluff 160th anniversary on October 21st, 1861, meaning we are at the Big Bad 160, man. We've seen it with Manassas this year, which is a great way to kind of start delving into our topic tonight about Bluff. But this is a topic I found more interesting than I bargained for, if that makes any sense. And Tim, I know you and I discussed this a little earlier today, but it is a very small footnote in the realms of Civil War history. Even today, there are very few books written. The ones that are written, I have read, are superlative. So, not taking away from that, but it's just clearly saying that unfortunately, there isn't a lot with this topic. This battle doesn't get the love Fredericksburg, maybe not a great example, but Gettysburg or Antietam or these major parks get. So it's that alone too, I think, that really helped drive the story home to me and make me want to share this with you, especially on a day like the 160th anniversary. But there's a story to be told there with the lives of the folks that serve there too. They're very interesting lives we see formulated afterwards, to the likes of which Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who becomes a Supreme Court justice. So that's, a very notable character we'll see there. A sitting U.S. Senator will have a very prominent role in this story at the time, known as Edward D. Baker. I used to pass his statue every single day, 3-4 times a day when I was working inside the Capitol building. And it's very interesting, and I think, I wouldn't say closure, but like it closes the story and the wonder. When I used to pass that, I would always kind of wonder what his story was. I never knew in depth. I knew sort of the minute details about what happened to Baker, but I never knew in depth and kind of the aftermath of what happens to Baker and what that does to policy, what is formed in Congress because of Baker, and really what business Baker really had on a battlefield that close. I was honestly confused. So being able to study this and having a few days it was crammed, but it was still doable. I got an understanding of why Baker did what he did, and I'm excited to share why maybe I think he did what he did. But Tim, I ask you because you have a better knowledge than I do, so I'd like you to open us today. Before we even get into the battle, of course, we have to kind of build up to what's happening. And for those that are aware of 1861 being that first year of the war, we have the Fort Sumter bombardment that the Confederates do propel into the Union-held fort at the time, which does pretty much cause civil war. And we have the major Battle of Manassas. I mean, I'm not ignoring Wilson's Creek and all the stuff happening in the West either, or even the Appalachian or Kanawha battles. But we look at Manassas. Obviously, there's a huge story to tell there. The Union is routed and the Confederates are victorious in this battle. And from my understanding, just because the Confederates won this major battle doesn't mean they were any less of a massed, confused fighting force that the Union was retreating to Washington. This isn't just a major victory and then whoop, organized army again. We're looking at a severe draft of nothing. I mean, it's chaos. It's hectic. Kojak, welcome to the stream, buddy. It's good to have you here. But yeah, Tim, and maybe you can help fill me in a little bit on this. But like, what's the scenario? Why is McClellan being called to force this against Johnson? Why is he now all of a sudden in command of this army that's now guarding the Potomac pretty much.
So yeah, well, the first year of war is pretty interesting. You had a couple actions early in the war. In the East, you had even prior to Bull Run or Manassas, you had Big Bethel on the peninsula. If you're down there, it's actually near former base housing for Langley Air Force Base. There's a monument. It was a pretty small battle. Ben Butler had the Union forces at Fort Monroe and led their column went out from there. About 3,500 Union troops ran into Magruder, who at that time was holding the Yorktown line. And this is a year before, or 9 months before the Peninsula Campaign.
Right.
And it was a pretty small battle, very similar in a lot of ways to Ball's Bluff. Magruder had roughly 1,500 men, 10 Confederate casualties, and something like 70 Union casualties. Confederates push the Union column back. You had Wilson's Creek in the west, with another notable General Lyon getting killed there. So the two sides were filling themselves out. I mean, you had a very small regular army, less than, roughly 20,000 guys or less.
Right.
Yeah, now you've pushed up to 75,000 volunteers in addition in climbing after Manassas. So very raw troops. In the midst of this, all this after Manassas, you have McClellan basically seizing a good chunk of Western Virginia, now West Virginia, in the, I think, Cheat Mountain campaign and other stuff in northern West Virginia, defeating, in effect, Robert E. Lee, I don't think he's actually assigned to command there. He's more or less advisor and dealing with squabbling co-commanders, and basically, takes control, even though he isn't assigned command, and he isn't effective there. And McClellan is. So he's won a victory. Keep in mind. So I bring all this up because Big Bethel, you have Ben Butler failing, then you have McDowell failing, and out west you have a very bloody fight at Wilson's Creek where the Union commanders killed. So the only Union commander to be successful up to this point is McClellan. So he's brought in. There is some acknowledgement that maybe Winfield Scott's a little too old for this, despite the fact that he's come up with what in effect is a war-winning plan before hostilities really.
And we're talking about the Anaconda Plan, right?
Yeah, we're talking about the Anaconda Plan, and that's ultimately what's succeeded, albeit it's a guy from, working in a tannery
right
at the time that brings it to fruition. Scott, his mentor developed the plan, and I think there's some discrepancy whether or not Grant ever, knew about the plan as Scott developed it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, and you think about assets and what the Confederacy had, I'm not trying to get off topic here. It's remarkable that it's very Grant-like because it's literally a common sense solution. Seize the river, seize the coast, strangle the Confederacy off. They can't get their cotton out. They can't get money. They're starved of resources. You target their strategic areas, war ends. But it took them years to figure that out. So McClellan comes in, and McClellan does, up for the rest of 1861, he does what he's truly best at. and he organizes one heck of an army. Troops come in, longer enlistments, the 3 month volunteers run out, the 3 years start coming in, or the 3 months re-enlist. So he's working at training an army. And all the while they're feeling each other out. There's skirmishing. They're trying to, ensure that the Potomac stays open. To Washington, that, keep in mind the Lincoln administration has to also worry about the slave state that surrounds the capital.
Yeah, you don't want to block. That's landlocked, and that. Oof.
So they have to worry about, Maryland and not ostracizing. And if you do ostracize it, you're going to have to maintain control by force.
Yeah.
So that's something very much on their mind of the politicians. And McClellan, is there come August. So nothing really for the next 2 months. And then they're getting reports, both sides have their intelligence networks, and then they get reports that maybe the Confederates are weakening positions around Leesburg, or that there's an unguarded Confederate force at Leesburg. A lot of people say that, Ball's Bluff for a long time was an attempt by the Union to seize Leesburg, but it's really a reconnaissance.
Right.
Not even a reconnaissance in force. That's an important strategic thing.
Because who goes over there first? We can start by kind of, before we get into the reconnaissance, I want to talk about the first, but I like a little bit of a backstory too, to piggyback off what you were saying, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Shanks Evans, I want to bring him up for a minute. We talked about Manassas. He's one of the, I guess you would call him starlights of the battle, because of course he's one of the notable names that you get from these battles. But we see him in positions around Leesburg. In fact, he's holding a fort. So when these reports go out that there are unguarded forts in and around Leesburg, this isn't necessarily the case. We have, regiments under command of, hell, the fort's named Fort Evans. Okay, so we know that there's a prominent, and Barksdale himself will be in one of the commanding regiments in the attack. So he's commanding, I believe it's 18th Mississippi at the time, but I could be wrong. I know he's in a Mississippi brigade at Ball's Bluff. So we do have a lot of notable characters on the side. But the reason that the Union is crossing is, believe it or not, something I like to just not chuckle at, but just see how Civil War plays out with its ironies, is an aggressive McClellan. And I mean, anyone can say, please say, let me know if I'm wrong, but McClellan's trying to push the Corps of Observation across the river. This is a McClellan order. At the end of the day, the Corps of Observation coming into Poolesville to try and figure out the force that is abandoning Leesburg, and that the goal of this operation is to capture Leesburg, right? But also a reconnaissance, sure. But what is the reconnaissance for? Isn't that reconnaissance in order to try and get the town and the supplies that's needed for the town? So when they discover the Confederates over there, and then 6,500 man division of Stone that's just around Poolesville, Maryland, we know that's on the opposite side, of where Harrison's Landing and in turn Ball's Bluff is at. But there's
right,
of course, right? Yeah, Poolesville, Maryland. There's the Edwards Landing, excuse me. Yeah, but Harrison's Landing is in the middle of both of those.
Okay.
Harrison's Landing is a 3-mile long island at the time in the middle of the Potomac. That is almost like, if you've ever seen Locks Island in Fredericksburg. In fact, here I have a map to show you, Tim, if you'd like to see real quick.
Yep.
So when we're looking at the Potomac River, do you see below? I know the box is kind of crappy. It's cutting us out. Do you see that stretch right there?
Yeah.
In the middle. Okay, I'm going to pull another map up for us while that's there, because that one it's not crappy. It's just the box has the unfortunate blockage of that. I want to get another one, because you can see Harrison's Landing, and it mentions it significantly as we go in. So of course I'll get into that more when we go on with the talk tonight. But I did notice and almost learned myself that Harrison's Landing was a very significant part of the battle, because the 1st Minnesota, who we talked about last night, a lot of their jumping off points, if you will, for that reconnaissance they do the night of the 20th is off of Harrison's Landing.
Right.
And that's pretty interesting in my mind. I thought that was really cool. And, even though they may not have played a major, well, okay, I'd be stupid to say they didn't play a major part in that battle. That is major in my mind because they're the ones really, discovering there's enemies across here. It's not necessarily the situation we had thought.
Well, I would argue that McClellan, when assessing aggressiveness, you got to look at behavior in general. I think a reconnaissance risks very little.
Mm-hmm.
And despite what actually occurred in the grand scheme of things, he, it tells him something about his army. It tells him, about capabilities, status of training, things like that. But he doesn't even risk a division at Ball's Bluff. So I wouldn't credit him too much with that. I mean, some things McClellan did is worthy of crediting him, but Ball's Bluff, I don't think he's displaying much of an aggressiveness, in my opinion.
Okay, I mean that's fair too. I mean, I thought it was uncharacteristic of him, but obviously I know how it plays out later. So of course my gears switching to an aggressive McClellan. But now I'm looking, I think, too far deep into it. I just like to throw that out there that it's uncharacteristic of what we learned to expect from McClellan. You know what I mean?
I mean, keep in mind also, there's already, I think, McCall's units,
yeah,
division, they're on the south side of the Potomac at Langley.
Yes.
So to extent
already in Virginia, so there's a maybe
so
not.
We're putting a force across, attempting a river crossing, therefore putting their back against the river is risky.
Right.
So I think everything needs to be evaluated in that light.
Well, and that's fair, definitely to say too. But I don't know. It was interesting to look at McClellan in that aspect, I guess. And it's also I do need to really heavily consider his early war McClellan too. It's not the same scenarios he's faced with later on when Stanton's in office either. I do believe it's still Scott and President's cabinet at that point, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a different administration almost that you're dealing entirely because Stanton has some very, very, very evident leeway with the president, and that plays into McClellan. So does Halleck.
I don't think Stanton's in at that point, is he? It's
no, I think it's not. I think Stanton's later. That's why it's different in my mind too. I need to look at McClellan a little different because he's got Scott still.
Yeah,
who is obviously still in command at that point. That's nice to have him. But with that being said, the first Minnesota do cross over on the 20th, again using Harrison's Landing with their ferry boats. So these ferry boats are actually canal boats, not ferry boats that we would think of today that's meant to take traffic back and forth across the river. This is more so of a canal boat to move supplies and shipments down the C&O Canal, and they're using these to now in turn take troops into battle. And so those troops aren't necessarily going into battle either. I should say they're going into a reconnaissance, and what they do is land over on the Virginia side, Ball's Bluff, Edwards Ferry, and work their way towards the town of Leesburg to see some Confederate forces, and we'll go back. They're not a fight. There's not a huge battle like we see the next day. That's October 20th, 1861. And on October 21st, 1861, we see an entirely different outcome. But some of the people that are key players today, I just wanted to get into that too, because it's nice to always have some humans to talk about when we bring these stories to life. We're going to start with sort of an order of battle, I guess. Charles Stone, who I mentioned just briefly with the Corps of Observation, are key Union forces here. Stone's division consists of 3 infantry brigades that we're going to see fighting. We're going to see Brigadier General Gorman's brigade, which is made up of the 2nd New York. They're made up of the 82nd New York Infantry, the 1st Minnesota, the 15th Massachusetts. We see the 15th Massachusetts. I said that one already. Where else am I looking for? Notes, I just jumbled myself. 34th, 42nd New York. Frederick Lander is going to command the 19th, 20th Massachusetts Infantry, 7th Michigan Infantry, and some Massachusetts sharpshooters. Now, those should be of note to some of you, especially if you're very familiar with Fredericksburg. And I'm going to leave it at that because we're doing Fredericksburg stuff, but I want you to specifically remember the 7th Michigan. I want you to specifically remember the 20th and 15th Massachusetts, specifically for December, but also from what happens tonight and what we talk about in this little episode. And of course, I think we're going to have another in depth discussion on Balls Bluffs. This isn't meant to be a huge one. This is just an anniversary event to talk about. I'm going to give a backstory, but it's still nice to know our players, and hopefully, some will come of that later. We're also going to see a sitting U.S. Senator, Edward D. Baker. Baker's in command of California regiments. But don't be deceived by the name California, that thinking they do hail from California, because as luck would have it, they're actually from Pennsylvania. Some of them are very famous regiments from Pennsylvania. And Tim mentioned this earlier, and I didn't put the connections together. And when I did, it paints a different story for Gettysburg. When you go to the angle and you see some Pennsylvania regiments right up on the angle, and realize at one point that they were California regiments. They're a California senator, and wanted, I believe it was themselves that wanted the name change to be Pennsylvanians again, with a petition from Governor Curtin himself. So interesting regiments here at Balls Bluff in 1861. So there's some crossing sites along the Potomac. The bluff itself, if you don't know the last name Ball, by the way, in Virginia, just a quick thing, Tim, you'll love this. Do you want to just tell them whose family happens to own this property?
Something tells me it involves Mary Ball,
Indeed, it does. It is property.
otherwise known as Mary Ball Washington, the mother of George.
That's right, my friend. So Balls Bluff, as funny as the name might sound, because it does make a lot of us historians chuckle every now and again, it is actually from the lineage of Mary Ball Washington. Fun fact, too, across the way, there's a manor house still standing in a facility known as North Spring. It's a behavioral health care place, actually, Tim. And there's the manor house there is one of the Custis family relatives, the Washington Park Custises.
Mm-hmm.
That lineage. So that's really cool that house still stands. Unfortunately, today it's been turned into offices, so it's just nothing but office and clerical stuff. But that whole property up there, it would make sense as to why Balls Bluff is known as Balls Bluff, with the family lineage and everything up there. And I kind of thought maybe that's what it was. And upon research today, of course, that's exactly what was one of the front page things that I read. So that was neat to find out, but I figured you would get a kick out of that specifically.
Yeah.
We have some Confederates, too, that we just recently mentioned. We have Nathan G. Evans, otherwise known as Shanks Evans. That consisted of the 13th, 17th, and 18th Mississippi Infantry. The 8th Virginia Infantry is made up of Company B, C, and E. The 4th Virginia Cavalry and Company K, 6th Virginia Cavalry. And the 1st Company of the Richmond Howitzers. About 1,700 Confederates in all. They'll be placed about 2 miles east of town in what I just mentioned earlier, too, Fort Evans. And thus, the headquarters of Shanks Evans will be placed in the name sake he calls his fort. Conrad's Ferry is what today would be known as White's Ferry. Smart's Mill, Edwards Ferry are all these different, very funneling type amenities, I'm going to call them, for a battle. And that's another draw for this landing site, I believe, for the Union troops, as it is kind of a very populous site, and it is a leeway straight into Leesburg. And about halfway between the two ferries is where Balls Bluff is located, and the Ball family, I guess, according to the notes here, originated from that area as well. And when they came to Virginia, the Ball family had a prominent stake here. The bluff itself is about 100 feet above the river, and it's covered by trees, rock outcroppings, and bluffs overlooking Harrison Island. It was 350 yards wide and 3 miles in length. And it was about 250 yards wide on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. So this is a formidable barrier separating now two armies that are kind of locked in, again, what they called Sitz Creek. That was something noted in World War II. It was coined in World War II, but I guess historians can refer to it in Civil War. I mean, that's exactly what it is, or the all quiet along the Potomac era, the winter
Hmm.
of 61 to 62. In mid October, the Confederate Army does have some significant movements and shufflings, I think, getting closer to the breadbasket that is the Shenandoah. And this is going to tick Union tickers, if you will, to kind of alert that there is some movement going on. And now the observation is focused on this area because there's more movement in Leesburg than there was previously, which is what prompts the 1st Minnesota to have their reconnaissance over Harrison's Landing, up the bluffs, and to find out what exactly is prompting this Confederate movement. Evans does respond the following morning of October 20th to some of the Union movement on the other side. And from the signal station on Sugarloaf Mountain, that's along the South Mountain Range,
Hmm.
McClellan can see a vacant Leesburg. So remember, Shanks Evans is not in Leesburg, he's on the outskirts. The Union forces believe that this fort and the guards are in the town. They see a vacated town, therefore indicating to the Union that it was what? Empty. The fort's not empty.
Right.
McClellan himself does not know what's happening and will evacuate the town and decide to apply additional pressure with Stone's division. Sends Stone and McCall's division, which is advancing in the direction of Drainesville, Virginia. And he told Stone to keep a lookout toward Leesburg to see if McCall's movements would drive the Confederates away. And McClellan ended the communique with perhaps a slight demonstration on some of your part would have effect to move them. So now they're trying to prompt Confederates out of wherever they might be and really, I guess, get an idea of what force they have in front of them. In the afternoon of the 20th, General Gorman's brigade, which was made up at this point of the 2nd New York and the 1st Minnesota Infantry, shuffled to Edwards Ferry for a demonstration, and Gorman's 34th New York Infantry was at Seneca, Maryland, which was 8 miles downstream of Gorman's regiments. They were ordered to the vicinity of Conrad's Ferry, and the 15th Massachusetts went into the vicinity of Harrison's Island. So I was wrong. It's not the 1st Minnesota that's on Harrison's Island. It's the 15th. 1st Minnesota is at Edwards Ferry.
Okay.
General Lander's 19th and 20th Massachusetts infantries are also in the vicinity of Harrison's Landing. They're going to be going alongside the 15th. The movement of Gorman's units to the ferry was joined by the 7th Michigan. God darn, the rivers and the regiments. I can get confused on this, huh? At the ferry, Gorman had 3 flatboats removed from the canal and placed in the river preparatory to a crossing. While the Confederates were being distracted by the demonstration at Edwards Ferry, Stone ordered Colonel Devens of the 15th Massachusetts, that name should also be familiar to some, on a scouting expedition toward Leesburg via Ball's Bluff. He had reconnaissance support from Companies A, C, and G, and Company H, while also trying to move the other regiments in conjunction around Edwards Ferry. Now, the Union regiments do arrive, and the scouting party walked in the dark about a mile when they saw about 30 to 40 tents on a ridge line at the Jackson home. They didn't see any Confederates, but again, they're moving in dark, so obviously they're either sleeping or they're out and about. Stone is now made aware of this happening and decided to go and destroy the camp, to send another force across to pretty much eradicate the camp. And sorry for the pauses. I'm going through notes in different collections I had today. I have like 3 papers over here that I'm trying to go through. I have some highlighted stuff that I wanted to talk about specifically with that reconnaissance, and I'm missing some of it apparently. But to cover the return of Devon's force, Colonel William R. Lee of the 20th Massachusetts was ordered to cross his regiment to Harrison's Island. He sent 2 companies across the river to the Bluff, and the 2nd New York came along guarding a pair, not just one, 2 12-pound mountain howitzers to a canal towpath and pointed them directly across Harrison's Landing. Second Lieutenant Frank S. French of the Battery I, 1st U.S. Artillery, assigned to command of the guns, and the 4 men of Battery I were assigned to the crews. These guns would be under the overall control of Colonel Lee and could fire onto Ball's Bluff to protect a hasty withdrawal. Artillery from Battery B of 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery also was placed in support. And finally, Stone ordered those Californians, the 1st California commanded by Isaac Wister and the 42nd New York Infantry commanded by Colonel Milton Cogswell, to wait at Conrad's Ferry, ready to provide additional support if needed. In addition to attacking the Confederate camp, Devens's orders stated that after accomplishing his missions, he was to return to the Maryland shore unless a strong position was found on the Virginia side of the river. And at midnight on the 20th of October, about 300 men moved quietly across their crossing sites, and there at 600 discovered Confederates. One of those men to discover them, by the way, of the 20th Massachusetts, is a man that we know gets court-martialed at Chancellorsville. So I just realized this too, to add to our talk about some of the regiments, having some issues abandoning stuff and walking off the field. You want to take a whack at whose name I'm about to read to you?
I have no clue, actually.
Major Paul Revere. The grandson of the Revolutionary War hero. I don't know if you've ever seen the sign on the history trail, but if not, I'll take you back there at Chancellorsville here soon. His grandson was court-martialed for cowardice, for taking his men off the middle of the front line at Chancellorsville on May 3rd, before the battle really broke out, and marched them across to the U.S. fort.
That part I knew. I didn't know. Put a Ball's Bluff connection to him.
I didn't either. That's why we knew someone from 20 Massachusetts rang so well earlier. We're like, who else is it? It's Paul Revere, his grandson. So at 600 on May, or I think this is October 21st, we're now at 600 hours indeed. And Devens's men are led down a little path. Of course, now they're in the area of Ball's Bluff. They're actually across the Potomac River on the Virginia side, where the Confederates are going to be ultimately awaiting. When they get to where Philbrick mentioned this, they realize it was a deception. And it was a row of trees on a perpendicular ridge line, with the night sky showing between the openings that presented a row of tents. There was no camp to attack, and Devens decided that something needed to be accomplished in this mission. And the rest of his command waited in the woods. And Devens, Philbrick, and the first lieutenant of that regiment, Church Howe, he was a quartermaster as well. Wow, that's too many jobs in my mind.
Yeah.
They crossed over the ridge and scouted towards Leesburg. And after a short while, they returned, and they didn't have anything to report. There was nothing from this up until about 7 o'clock in the morning. The next report was, again, there's no enemy camp. Now Stone's requesting Gorman to start moving on and preparing to cross to pretty much bolster his men that are across. And I have a map to depict 6:30 to 7. The only people really across the river at this point, again, are two companies of the 20th Massachusetts and the 15th Massachusetts that are, again, investigating what was reports of tents put up around the Jackson House. Under the cover of artillery fire, the two companies of the 1st Minnesota Infantry and a detachment of about 30 horsemen of the 3rd New York Cavalry would cross over to the Virginia shore. Infantry covered the crossing site. The cavalry advanced as far as the Leesburg Turnpike and report on the number of disposition of any enemy seen. Back at the bluff, Colonel Lee took a quick look at his surroundings. His troops were on the edge of an open field in a shape of a trapezoid, to paint that picture. And the woods surrounded all sides of the field, and a path was led towards Leesburg. At 7:30 a.m., several enlisted men of Company I, 20th Massachusetts, in the wood to picket the slope. They were put on a ravine, too. So have you ever seen Shot to Pieces? This is the scene where those pickets go out on that ridge. And on the opposite side's Company K, 17th Mississippi Infantry, at a place known as Smart's Mill. Those Massachusetts get their baptism by fire and start booking it back. The Confederate pickets quickly informed their commander, William Duff, that the Union are now across in some force, and the news was forwarded to Shanks Evans. who then took his entire camp, which was less than a mile away, and brought the remaining men towards the ridge at the Jackson House. Devens's pickets spotted Duff and about 800 of his men moving and alerted Colonel Devens. Captain Philbrick was ordered to advance Company H, which he took over the ridge and tried to attack the Confederates that were there. And Captain Rockwood of Company A was to move his men trying to block a road that led to Smart's Mill. And then from there, they were to prevent the enemy from moving to the north, which obviously threw the Union into disarray and shocked them. Duff and his men quickly kind of broke to about 300 yards down the slope with a charging Union force behind them. And Philbrick, with his unit, drew closer and closer until the Confederates ordered their men to halt. Duff then screamed fire and gave them a volley at a very close range, which impromptu returned a massive fire from skirmishers under Philbrick, specifically with Company G. And this is what starts Ball's Bluff. More companies are going to funnel in. Companies B, C, and E of the 4th Virginia Cavalry and Company K, 6th Virginia Cavalry, came to support Duff. He starts commanding, and Devens now has to fall and rely on more Union troops, which would come from 3 companies of the 15th Massachusetts to follow them on the right. What happens now is the Confederates, in turn, as we're reaching our time here, I just want to shorten this up, skim a little more depth. The Confederates basically reinforce their men. The Union are going to shuffle more troops across. And the Confederates are then beating back this attack, and the result of that was almost a useless slaughter. The Union troops were not prepared to make a crossing this size or on these types of conditions. And the bluff, again, being roughly 100 feet, meant virtually Union soldiers were falling to their deaths or drowning across in the Potomac River. And their bodies would wash up in the likes of which of the town of Georgetown in D.C. a month later. Further than that,
they found him at Mount Vernon.
Jesus. Well, I want to get into more of that, and hopefully more comes of this. There is someone I mentioned earlier that did also express interest in joining us for another episode that would go further in depth than what we just did today. But we wanted to make sure we covered a little bit of the 160th and shared this with you guys today. Tim, do you have anything you want to add to the show tonight before we get ready to wind it down?
No, I think it's an interesting Ball's Bluff is an interesting study. I mean, for many of these units, it's this is the first combat for the 3 years men. So they're still raw. McClellan's training isn't complete. I mean, they got to get blades sometime, but that was interesting. I do wonder, it was interesting given that the mission was a reconnaissance. Once that the 15th and the 20th Mass made the contact, at that point they'd accomplished their mission.
You would think so.
It was, Stone comes under fire as a scapegoat, largely I think because Baker was dead. But someone flubbed because the record's pretty clear. It was a reconnaissance. They found that no, Leesburg is not empty. Yes, it's held in some force.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to try to get into McClellan's mindset a little bit, why he's holding that reconnaissance, he's protecting assets too. If there is a ford there and the Confederates may be gone, there's fords elsewhere.
Right.
Are they going for the B&O Railroad in Maryland? Are they crossing in a raid into Maryland? You still have the canal, the C&O Canal, and you mentioned it in your account, howitzers firing from the vicinity. Mm-hmm. And the canal is active, and it's a vital piece of infrastructure. And both the C&O and the B&O Railroad are relatively close to the river. Mm-hmm. So have the Confederates gone from there? Are they heading to the valley to cross from Harper's Ferry?
Right, it's an unknown thing for them.
And tie that into the concerns that the Union has about Maryland. Concerns that, less than a year later are still very much present come the Antietam campaign. Yep. So to get in, I think a reconnaissance was justified. The problem was you're dealing with fresh guys. You say, "Hey, I want a reconnaissance to find out what forces are in and around Leesburg, and if possible, we can create a new base for our westernmost elements,
Right.
to extend from Langley, which is where McCall was, out, towards Leesburg." But if not, we know the Confederates are still there. Mission accomplished. Go back, and instead it costs 500 captured, couple 100+ killed, some wounded, and
Yeah. I mean, it's useless Union slaughter at that point. It was a sitting senator killed on the battlefield, which again I really hope to dive into more. But I mean, Tim, I can't thank you enough for joining. I'm again sorry it was so short, guys. It's a late one. It wasn't really planned. It was kind of a last minute one for us too. But it was cool to just kind of chat and give a little shout out to a lesser known battle, and hopefully again we can dive some more into that soon. But otherwise, Tim, thank you for joining tonight. I really do appreciate all your input.
no, thanks for setting this up and having me on.
Absolutely, guys. Yeah, absolutely. And folks, be on the lookout more for some just random content like this. Hopefully, it'll be a little earlier. Hopefully, it'll be the same time. We have late night history. We have early day randoms, which is kind of how the page is. So just keep an eye on it. And if anything is live and you miss it, it'll be up as soon as we go off air to watch all over again. So you never really have to miss it. But again, Tim, thank you so much. It was 160th anniversary today of Balls Bluff. So if you haven't read about it and you want to learn some more, there's definitely some great stuff to look at, and they'll be posted on the page. Thank you guys again for joining, and we will see you again next time.